Thank you very much indeed. Over 90% of leaders in my studies said AI literacy is now essential for leadership, yet fewer than 1 in 5 feel confident navigating AI governance. So we'll come back to that in a moment or so, but I wanted to ask you how you feel about AI. We've just had a session on AI, and it will be a good conversation to sort of go around the room and ask how you feel about AI. And perhaps when you got up this morning, you thought, I'm not going to be asked about how I feel about AI. We could get into a deep philosophical conversation about can you feel about technology and the rest of it. So I've just put together some images, and I wondered if these kind of resonated with you about how you're feeling now about AI. So if you're feeling confused, probably join the club, because I think most people are. Most people are just trying to get their head around what it means, what it is, and how things are going to change. So if you're feeling like that, if you're feeling uncomfortable, confused, then I think you're in a very large majority. And perhaps do you remember 3 or 4 years ago there was this craze about air fryers, and kind of we were all thinking, do I need one? What do they do? Somebody else has got one, should I have one? There was FOMO, wasn't there? We got one, it got used once in a year. It gets used a bit more now, but we thought we should have one, so we got one, didn't use it. And so not to be sexist, there's a man confused about an air fryer as well. When I was playing rugby, we've got any other rugby players here? Yeah, brilliant. So this isn't the actual picture because there are people there. Nobody would come and watch me play rugby. But this is what happened. I was in the middle of the pitch, and this ruck had formed. It was just like this, and out of the back of the ruck, the ball actually came to me unexpected. I was half asleep, or I wasn't expecting it, which is never a good idea in rugby. You should always be thinking that you're going to receive a ball, and because it was right in the middle of the pitch, I had so many options. I could go left, I could throw the ball left, and throw the ball right, I could take it up, I could kick it. And of course, by the time all these options ran through my head, the chap emerged, from this direction, absolutely flattened me. The next thing I knew, I was on my back, looking up at the sky, and I'm wondering what day it was. And this is kind of metaphor for AI, is that, could we be caught out by what's happening? And then I did bring the book along. When you're doing academic research, it's always good to look at children's stories. And I read my son this book, and for his bedtime story. And maybe I was the only one that didn't know this, but did you know? Be honest with me. Is the female lays the egg, of course, but it's the male that incubates the egg. So the male stands like that for about 2 months, during which time, at the end of that period, is that the egg incubates, and then the female comes along, takes over, and the male penguin goes off for something to eat. So, did anybody else not know that? But I think again, this is a kind of metaphor in terms of are things being shaken up such that all received wisdom we've had before is kind of making us think again, and there's new stuff coming along all the time, making us feel uncomfortable. So this was generated by AI, by the way. The egg wouldn't be on the ice like that, but it's actually on his feet to keep it warm. So it's quite interesting that AI came up to that. So I've been doing this doctorate about 3.5 years. The thesis should go in within the month, but I said that this time last month, so it's taken a bit longer. But I'm doing it with the Swiss School of Business and Management in Geneva, and I asked ChatGPT to give me a tagline. It was quite cool to give yourself a tagline, slightly pretentious. But I just want to get across the point that I take a very objective view to things. So I try to see both sides. So I'm not here to sell anything, to kind of promote anything or a particular point of view. It's really just to kind of stimulate some thoughts, stimulate some debate. And disclaimer, if I am an investor as well, so if I do get into that side a bit, I'm not giving anybody investment advice. Because don't go out and do something based upon what you've heard from this session. Not as though you would do, but I just want to make that clear. So this session is really just to have a quick look at AI, look at some findings from my research and what does that mean for us, and then have some fun around predictions and suggestions. and be interested in your views if we have time. So back to that question, that over 90% of leaders in the study said AI literacy is now essential for leadership, yet fewer than 1 in 5 feel confident navigating AI governance. Now that gap should make us pause. One question keeps surfacing is not what can the technology do, but are we ready for the responsibility that comes with it? And that question became the heart of my research. And I surveyed over 300 people. They were largely kind of leaders in large corporate commercial organisations. So what I found was a paradox. Almost every leader recognises that AI literacy is now essential, yet very few feel confident guiding it ethically or governing it responsibly. 90% say it matters, but one in five believe they're ready. And that gap between awareness and readiness isn't just an operational issue, it's a leadership one. It's about how we learn, how we decide, and ultimately how we lead in an age where our choices will teach machines how to think. The question is, are we ready for that responsibility? Where are we with AI? ChatGPT was released to the public nearly 3 years ago, incredibly. But of course, AI is not a new concept. It was coined in 1956 by John McCarthy. And that was considered kind of dawn of the AI as a proper subject. The key enablers in terms of where we are, is that there's been a huge increase in computing power, the advent of large data centres, and the vast amounts of data that we all create every day. They're structured, unstructured, synthetic, and said that data is the new oil, in other words, a very valuable resource. And over 400 million terabytes of data are created every day. Now, none of us can picture that, but I guess it's an awful lot of data that's being created, and then that can be commercialised, manipulated and used for AI models, and then commercialised. So this is where we are with it. And then huge amounts of inflows of capital that have come into AI. So in short, capability and infrastructure meets money, meets capital. And you probably heard the phrase, we're in the age of AI, the fourth industrial revolution. And then some recent highlights. It's the advent of GPUs, traditional computers based upon CPUs and graphical processing units. Other things that's putting kind of rocket boosters under AI. And preeminent in that market are NVIDIA. Everybody heard of NVIDIA? So they became the world's first $4 trillion company. I think they're at 4.5 trillion now, which is roughly the size of annual UK GDP. So a company is the size of our GDP, which seems incredible. And then a couple of years ago, China spent more on importing chips than they did oil, about 350 billion. I dare say that's a lot more now. Huge data center growth. There are many data centers in flight, and there's about 100 or so in the UK alone that are currently being built or slated just before they get some kind of shovels in the ground. DeepSeek. So DeepSeek caused a big stir. If you remember that earlier in the year, where they trained their AI model much faster and much cheaper than OpenAI did with ChatGPT, and that caused stock markets to kind of have a jittery phase. And actually, NVIDIA lost some of its market capitalisation, which it's got back since. But it meant that it put kind of China on the map in terms of being at the forefront or towards the forefront of AI development, which is quite interesting. Huge capital inflows. We've seen the introduction of the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act. And so companies, not only within Europe, but if you trade with Europe, you need to understand what that means for you, how you make your company and what you do compliant with that act. So there's a lot of companies that try and get their head around that, so that they don't, they don't get sanctions if they fall foul Cyber attacks are almost on a daily basis, aren't they? I mean, this year alone in the UK, we've had Marks and Spencers where their online system was offline for, I don't know what it was, a month or so. You know, lost huge revenues because of that. And then Jaguar Land Rover actually closed production and upset the supply chains, and they needed a £1 billion loan just to dig them out of the hole and get them back, get the production line running again. And that loan was backed by the UK government. So cyber attacks do have a significant impact. And then high quality video. So whereas before, if we wanted to produce pretty good video, we'd have to engage a production company, there'd be actors and goodness knows what, script writers and all that kind of stuff. Now we can do pretty good video from our laptops. Now it's not going to be, they're not Hollywood blockbuster standard quite at the moment, but they're good enough for educational and commercial reasons. And no doubt in several years' time, people may be producing Hollywood blockbusters from the laptop, who knows? But that's the direction of travel. So kind of what's it all about? This is the predicted global GDP impact of AI, and sorry, it's all very small. I do apologise. We could have done it a bigger screen, but the above line is the total AI contribution in trillions of dollars. And if we look at, whatever that is, let's say that goes from 7 to 26 in 10 years, $1 trillion. And then the percentage impact goes from 5 to whatever that is, 14, just within 10 years. So it's predicted to have a very significant impact on the global GDP. Now, of course, if you agree with this, it might be that you don't think it will, but this is what the predictions are. This is from PwC and McKinsey. So it'd be interesting to see how this plays out. And then if we look at very quickly the largest companies by market capitalisation from 1985 through to this year, on the left-hand side, 1985, it's largely made up of oil and manufacturing companies. And interestingly, number 4, Philip Morris, anybody know them? Tobacco company. I mean, it's horrific, isn't it? They're the 4th largest company in the world. And then moving towards 2020, where more tech came to the fore. And then now we have, as we've already said, and then we have Nvidia at the top, and then usual suspects around big tech. Saudi, they're an oil company. This is Taiwan. They make a lot of the semiconductors for Nvidia, interestingly enough. Berkshire Hathaway, headed by Warren Buffett. But you can see how things have changed over time. Okay, so big tech is here. Big tech is playing, driving things. And if we mentioned Trump, we mentioned him again. We can't seem to get away from him. Do you remember his inauguration? It was inside because the weather was so inclement. If he was stood here, within a couple of meters of him, there were the heads of the big tech, basically. Now, what does that tell you about their influence? Just quickly, Nasdaq. So this is a stock market in the United States, largely focused on tech and high growth companies. The blue line is the growth of the Nasdaq in general from 2000 to sort of middle of this year. Then the red line is the growth of big tech. The 10 big tech here. You can see might be able to recognise the logos. You've got Nvidia, Microsoft, Apple, Google, all those usual suspects there. You can see the big growth. Now the big debate at the moment is whether this is a bubble, like the dot-com bubble. And there was a discussion on the earlier session just before this. There are people on both sides of the argument. There are people saying we're just at the start of this. Other people saying this is a bubble. Don't invest now. It's going to burst. You can't pay your money. You take your choice. Then you've really got a view on that.
What's your view on
it? I tend to believe that I think the valuations are troublesome, and the return on investment. If you take traditional investment in a way that as they say Wall Street would look at these things, and some companies do look over values, and they're not generating profit enough for say Wall Street analysts that would want more. Would want more from that aspect. But it's really all about the future. So all that capital is going into it. You won't get a return on that capital for some time. You just have to be patient. But I think it's kind of inevitable, because I do believe it's the fourth industrial revolution. I think it's a very, very, very significant change. But who are the winners and losers in terms of investment? I think that's the debate, rather than whether we're in a bubble. But there could be a correction of the market fairly soon, and there might not be. So this is the challenge that we have. So again, you pay your money, you take your choice. In video, we mentioned it before, but if we just think back to the end of the pandemic, it doesn't seem that long ago, we were all wearing masks. So that's where they were down here, and then up to fairly recently, I forget when, a couple of weeks ago, they've actually increased their market capitalisation by 13,000%, and since their inception, it's gone up 34,000%. So did anybody invest down here? But I guess you wouldn't be here. You'd be in your beachside villa in Barbados, doing some pina colada. But it would have been nice, wouldn't it, if we all jumped in on that when it was down there. So we don't need to worry too much about the figures, but again, this is a global data center growth and AI-driven demand. So taking 2015 as an index of 100, by 2030 it's going to be about 4 times that. And the AI-driven share, this is a percentage along here, has gone from kind of very low up to, what's that, 55-60%, which is absolutely enormous.
It takes lots of hardware to support life-changing software. This data center opened in Irving last week. Its owner, Edged, spent months modifying the vacant warehouse for supercomputers. To run AI, they need the right building, special cooling systems, and plenty of power.
They have to produce a lot of electricity, and we'll make it possible for them to get that production done very easily at their own plants if they want.
This week, President Trump announced Project Stargate. Several high-tech heavyweights promised to invest a combined $500 billion over the next 4 years on infrastructure supporting AI, including their own power plants. The feds will cut red tape to speed construction.
This is going to be about building new projects in the real world construction.
Neil Chilson was a technology expert for the FTC.
This is a huge opportunity for Texas.
The Lone Star State hosts almost 400 data centers already. It's easy to get a permit here. There's plenty of land and people to employ. That's why Stargate's first project is already under construction in Abilene.
Each building's 500,000 square feet. There are 10 buildings currently being built, but that will expand to 20.
Combined, Texas's data centers use lots of electricity, nearly 10% of the state's peak demand. But if they start generating their own supply, it shouldn't strain Texas's grid. That'd mean more warehouses like this one. In Irving, I'm Matt Houston.
And then electricity consumption. Again, we don't need to get into figures, but we can see a big, sharp uptake. But these data centers require a huge amount of power, and that's quite a debate one. They need water as well to cool them down, and they need electricity to make them work. So those demands are quite considerable. So what are some of the concerns? You could do a session on each one of these. So I'll just touch on them briefly, but we can't go into any depth on them. There's a thing about the whole treatment of data, how it's collected, stored and manipulated, the bias and fairness and privacy concerns around AI models, the lack of human oversight. If we've got machines making decisions, what if they get those decisions wrong? Is there enough human oversight until they become super clever? We get AGI. We're in that point now where they do need oversight, and there'd be a tendency for companies just to take AI decisions as face value. There's all sorts of dangers around that. Power consumption and environmental impact, which you've already touched upon. Copyright infringements. That's an interesting one, about musicians and actors and all that sort of stuff. If they're data and their content is being used to train AI systems. Is that fair? Should they be compensated for that? And then when that's within the AI system, who actually owns that? Power and influence of big tech, I was going to mention that, they clearly have a lot of influence. Fragmentation and regulation of governance. There's what's called the digital empires, which is basically China, Europe and the US. And each one of those areas are developing their own regulations and their own governance, which is fine if you just operate within those borders. But with globalization and international companies that operate internationally, that's a problem because you're dealing with different jurisdictions and you've got to confront all these different regulations, some which could be conflicting. So this will be one of the, it's kind of quite prosaic, but it's quite an important aspect of how AI will develop. And a lot of politicians actually talk a lot of nonsense about this because they don't understand it. And it is quite a dry thing. And I know everybody wants more kind of AI sexy stuff, but they don't want to think about regulation. But it's important to regulate so that we get the right systems that serve businesses, serve humanity, and they don't go off and do the wrong things. So this is absolutely critically important to get right. And I'm not sure the right amount of attention is being given to it. The next one is my sort of focus of my interest within the doctorate would be the organisational leadership preparedness and job displacement. And there was another video.
3 seasons and a podcast.
Bragging about getting gigs and battling a villain. Meet the latest creation from the world of artificial intelligence.
Tilly Norwood, 100% AI generated.
The European company Particle 6 is presenting her as an actress. The CEO says she's been meeting with entertainment companies, and Norwood could be represented by a talent agency in the next few months. Real-life actors are outraged. Here's what Emily Blunt told a Variety podcast.
Good Lord. We're screwed. That is really, really scary. Come on, agencies, don't do that.
The AI has an unfair advantage, says Whoopi Goldberg.
Bring it on. Yeah. Because you can always tell them from us.
Taking up the fight, too, is SAG-AFTRA, the union representing actors in the U.S. It released a statement saying creativity is and should remain human-centered, and that this is jeopardizing performer livelihoods. ACTRA, the union in Canada, is pushing back on Norwood, too.
It is 100% not an actor. It's an amalgamation of probably hundreds, if not thousands, of professional actors, performers, who have not been compensated at all for this.
The unions have already fought and won some AI protections for actors, including consent and compensation for reproductions of their likeness. As for synthetic performers like Norwood, studios would have to negotiate with the unions. Either way, AI isn't going away. This actor and AI filmmaker in Toronto thinks content with performers like Norwood should have their own genre.
Who knows, maybe down the depths of look, if you're scrolling next time on Netflix, there's like action, there's drama, there's horror, and then there might be a completely new category like AI.
Meanwhile, Particle 6's CEO has responded to the backlash. In a statement, she said Norwood is not a replacement for a human, and that AI is another way to build stories. Magda Gebrselassie, CBC News, Toronto.
So it's interesting, isn't it? To see even actors having their livelihood threatened. Much else besides. So when I began this research, I wanted to understand what it truly means to lead responsibly in the age of AI. But not from the perspective of the technologist or the regulator, but from the leader, the people within their organisations that are leading all this. The person that carries both opportunity and accountability across hundreds of responses, one message stood out. AI is no longer a technical issue. It's become a defining test of leadership competence. 90% of leaders agreed that AI literacy is now essential. And among those that have begun to develop the literacy, more than 80% said their roles have already expanded. They're now directly involved in guiding AI adoption and deployment. That tells us something important. AI isn't replacing leadership, it's redefining it. It's asking leaders to evolve, to combine strategic vision with a working understanding of technology, ethics, and governance. Sorry. This isn't about coding or algorithms, it's about the ability to ask better questions, make informed decisions, and create a culture that uses AI with integrity and foresight. The leaders who understand this aren't sitting on the sidelines, they're shaping how AI enters their organisations, and in many cases, how it enters society itself. So the gap between expectation and readiness is not abstract. It shows up clearly in the data from my research. So when I asked leaders about the skills they needed to lead in the age of AI, the message was consistent. AI literacy is no longer seen as a specialised technical skill. It has become a core leadership competency, and the numbers tell the story. So my key finding one is that over 90% of respondents concur that AI literacy has become an essential leadership competency, especially for organisations operating globally. Over 80% of respondents who demonstrated strategic literacy in AI report an expansion of their roles to encompass responsibilities related to AI integration and deployment. This widespread consensus signifies a shift in the criteria for leadership effectiveness in the digital age. This underscores the development of a novel leadership paradigm that requires a blend of strategic foresight and practical proficiency in AI. Secondly, survey respondents strongly agreed on the need for leaders to understand responsible data practices. Data fuels AI systems, and poor stewardship of data undermines trust and transparency. You may remember back in 2018 with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, when they harvested personal data from millions of Facebook users without their consent. The data was allegedly used to micro-target digital advertising and raising serious concerns about privacy breaches, manipulation of democratic processes, and inadequate platform oversight. So in this case, leadership failed to anticipate ethical and legal risks leading to global scrutiny and lasting reputational harm. And Facebook were fined $5 billion and if I remember correctly, 500,000, which was a maximum from the FCA in the UK. That was a significant breach. So ethical data management must be treated as a leadership competency, not a technical issue. Key insight 3, only 18% of survey leaders reported confidence in their understanding of AI governance and regulation. Over 70% of respondents acknowledged the need for assistance in understanding AI governance and regulation, highlighting a widespread lack of knowledge. Without governance knowledge, organisations risk compliance failures. This is the key thing. Reputational damage and missed opportunities. And it may be that some companies, if they don't get this right, they will not be able to put it right, and they may go out of business. It's as simple as that. So this finding indicates that many leaders and professionals feel inadequately prepared to navigate and comply with the evolving frameworks governing AI. And then considering, the intricate and rapidly advancing nature of AI regulations in government, such as the EU AI Act, NIST RMF, and OECD guidelines, among many others, this demand is not unexpected. Respondents may have encountered challenges in grasping the implications of legislation, implementing governance frameworks within their specific context, and aligning organisational policies with legal obligations. Again, it's not sexy stuff, but these are absolute critical building blocks if we're going to get this whole AI thing right. In my view, you may differ. The fourth one is nearly 90% of respondents have affirmed an ethical imperative of fairness and human dignity in AI decision making. Such overwhelming agreement suggests that these principles are not only widely endorsed, but are likely perceived as foundational to responsible AI adoption within organisational contexts. And ethical concerns such as fairness and dignity are no longer peripheral considerations. They are becoming mainstream expectations among professionals, executives, and leaders engaged in AI-related roles. Bias remains a significant concern as AI systems frequently inherit societal prejudices embedded within their training data sets. We mentioned the vast amounts of data, there will be biases within that data because we as humans have biases based upon our backgrounds and our upbringings and our environment, etc., etc., etc. And if those biases, which they are being brought into the AI systems, the decisions that the AI systems subsequently make will be incorrect and downright damaging.
Implicit bias is a stereotype. It's an unconscious, involuntary opinion that informs our actions all day, every day. These implicit biases are now embedded in our algorithms.
If we capture the world completely accurately, we might capture inappropriate phenomena that we wish to exclude from the systems that we are building.
If the data is unjust and have biases in them, the model will learn and propagate them.
I'm very worried about a world where AI is used to increase disparities between groups where AI is biased. There's a lot we can do to prevent that world from happening. There's a lot we can look at in terms of existing laws and regulatory frameworks, their best practices. There are a whole host of things we can do to make sure that the AI we're adopting is not biased.
The time to act is now. We're far enough along that we know that these harms are not theoretical, but we're not too far that we can't stop them from recreating decades and centuries of discrimination in our society.
At the end of the day, computers are not programmed by themselves. They're actually programmed by human beings. And human beings bring their values, assumptions, and norms about the world that factor into these models that we're actually creating. So we have to care about bias in AI. If we as humans don't care about bias in AI, then we honestly don't care about the flow of democratic participation and how we actually democratize systems so that everybody gets to be able to participate.
Okay, so these are the key themes from the research. Each one of these really needs quite a bit of explanation. But the key themes that emerged from the research was, the first one was the rapid evolution of leadership roles and the corresponding readiness gap. Leaders do not feel ready generally for what's happening and what's coming down the line, and we've got to improve upon that. The second one is the interconnectedness of AI governance, regulations, ethics, and legal compliance. Now, again, I don't want to labour the point, but it's not at all sexy. It's foundational. It's stuff we've got to get this stuff right if we're going to have very useful AI going into the future. And there is not enough noise about this at the moment because everybody's thinking about the technology and the data centres and all the interesting stuff. We've got to get this right. There's a critical skills gap and the need for practical AI literacy. I've probably said it, so I don't need to labour the point, but we need leaders that really understand what they're doing around this, understanding the technology, how it impacts their organisations, how it impacts their stakeholders like their customers and their employees, all this kind of stuff. Yeah, at the moment, it's kind of acceptable for people not to understand that too much, but that window won't last very long. People have got to get a grip with all this stuff if you're leading technological change based upon AI. The urgent imperative for holistic AI leadership education beyond technical proficiency is kind of the same point. It's not the job of IT. It's not them over there. If you're a leader within an organisation, no matter what that size could be, a small organisation, could be a multinational, you've got to be taking responsibility for this because AI is already starting, but it's going to increasingly have a big impact on what your organisation does. You've got to embrace the technology, you've got to understand what you're doing. And then formalising AI leadership development and strategic planning around that, strategic talent planning. So that's organisations putting in place the right level of training, information, knowledge, all that kind of stuff, not as an afterthought, but up front, making sure we've got young people, new leaders coming through that are trained properly. And that includes things like the technology, governance, but also what it means to behave ethically around all this stuff, how you store data, how you manipulate data, whose data is it, all these questions. People have got to know what they're doing with stuff. And so I developed this framework, which we shan't go into any detail on it, but it has 4 pillars picking up themes from the key findings. I'm sorry that's like that, but it's to represent the fact that the pillars, but it does mean that people can't read them. But anyway, so I developed this framework to tackle the findings that I had, and to look objectively at what had come out. Is what can we then do about it? What can organisations use as a framework to take forward that deployment and education of AI, and to make sure that there's responsible and ethical and strategic AI. So the 4 pillars are strategic and transformational leadership on the left-hand side here, the ability to see AI not just as a tool, but as a driver of organisational change. Governance and regulatory fluency, understanding evolving legal frameworks and embedding them into decision-making. Ethical and risk literacy, the ability to evaluate AI systems for fairness, transparency and accountability. And ethical data management, treating data not as a technical asset, but as a matter of trust and responsibility. So together the 4 pillars form the foundational trail. They create a compass for leaders to navigate complexity, clarity and confidence. So conscious of time, I'm not going to go, I might just pick out sort of 2 or 3 of these. These are some predictions of mine, just opinions, and it'd be interesting to come back in a couple of years' time. Remember that load of rubbish you predicted it didn't happen, or you're a genius, all these things that come to fruition. I mean, but none of this is rocket science. It's kind of, you don't need to search very far and wide to come up with these things. But we've discussed energy and water consumption, and the environmentalists would be concerned about the amount of energy and water that these large data centres, and some of them absolutely humongous, the size of cities, some of these data centres now, or the ones being built. There's a big one in the Middle East, there's another big one in Texas, as I already mentioned. My view is the term AI would just kind of disappear at some stage because we've got all these things like robotics and driverless stuff and Internet of Things, and it all just kind of merge into being the way we now do things. So we won't think about something as artificial intelligence. I don't know when that will happen, but that's, I think that will happen. Investment, we won't go into that. This is a big one. Return on investment, picking up the question from earlier, is chief executives are going to have to start justifying all the capital that's going in to this, the expenditure on AI, because any company needs to see a return. Whatever you're spending on, there needs to be a return at the other end, and it needs to positively influence your bottom line. And if it doesn't start to do that, I think there'll be some CEOs that start to lose their jobs, and there's going to be some shake-ups. Pretty soon, I imagine, because that debate's already, there's those whispers at the moment. We're spending all this money. Where's the benefit? And it's okay, some people. Well, it needs to take a long-term view. In order the people, the shareholders, they don't take a long-term view. They want results now. So vertical consolidation. This is where big companies will start to take over smaller companies just to provide moats that protects them from stuff. So I imagine that will happen. So you get large tech will start taking over chip manufacturers and all that kind of stuff. Regulatory issues, we discussed that one. Cybersecurity, we discussed that one. Quantum computing, if they manage to solve that one and it becomes commercialised, that could put kind of rocket fuel under AI. Likewise with nuclear fusion, similar sort of position where it's a concept and some bits work. But if they solve that and it's scalable, it becomes a game player really. And I wouldn't say it takes away this issue, but it certainly ameliorates much of it. Disputes over copyright, we talked about that. Data violations, we talked about the Facebook thing, and quite frankly, I see this happening more where data's been misappropriated or taken from one place without permission. It's probably going on without us knowing, and I think there'll be more transparency around this, be some more eyeballs. And I'll come on to that in just a second. And then I would say this increased focus on ethical behaviour. This is my if you take nothing away from this, it's that we've got to behave ethically around this stuff. It's very, very important. Any there? So very quickly, just some suggestions. Be careful with, as an individual, be careful with your data and your digital footprint. Embrace AI thoughtfully and with purpose. Don't just say they're doing stuff over there. Really think about what they're doing. Be mindful of the risks and shortcomings of AI. We touched on some of them today, about bias and all the rest of it. Do think about these things, about how you're engaging with them. What does that mean? And be aware of experts. Excuse my French. Have your bullshit monitor on, because there are people that will read a book and all of a sudden they want to sell you some consultancy. Be very careful. And then for enterprises, organisations, data, be careful how you collect it, how you store it, how you manipulate it. Make sure your use cases are well thought through. Prioritise your use cases. Don't just throw AI at things. Make sure it's tackling the right use cases. Return on investment, we said that one. That should be part of. You should have a business case for each use case, and part of that business case should have the financial projection around that. Have an AI strategy. Business principles are still essential because it's new and whizzy and everything. Doesn't mean that you should throw old business principles out the window. They're probably as relevant now than they've ever been. Stay current. This is changing. I know this. It's really, really difficult to stay up to date. Things are happening on a daily basis, but you need to stay on top of things. And reskilling. Do not be frightened. Put your hand up and say, "I don't understand it. I don't understand that." And get trained. Okay. Don't assume. Don't be shy. Don't be. What's the word? I forget the word now. It'll come to me. Coy would be the word. Just finally, then, call to action: make AI literacy a leadership priority. Embed governance and ethics into every decision. Treat responsible AI not as an obligation, but as a source of resilience, trust, and sustainable growth. And then my closing thought on this is the future will not be decided by algorithms and technological capability, but by the choices and competence of the leaders who guide them. Because ultimately, responsible AI is not a question of technological possibility, but of leadership responsibility. So thank you all very much for listening.